Welcome back. All right, so the second power rankings for the 2022 calendar year, and some big changes this week. Really, some big changes this week. Just some teams that I feel right now are playing really well. Some teams that I feel like there's some issues there. And there are teams that are being shut down. There are teams that haven't been. There's debate over who should or shouldn't be, and all these lineups. All I go by is the results. That's it. So that being said, everything else out of the way, a team that I'm pretty sure didn't play this week is still 32nd, and that's the Montreal Canadiens. So Montreal stays at the bottom of the board. Their most recent list of players and just everybody who's on the list, it's a lot. So it does make me wonder if they're just leaving people on the list longer just because they're not playing, or like if there's going to be this massive number of players coming off of the list. But you would think they'd have to start playing this week, right? So we'll see what happens. Number 31, dropping one spot from last week, Buffalo. Buffalo Sabres find themselves at 31st on the board because I felt like there was a team that had a half-decent week, and it feels like is trending in. I mean, they're both looking at pretty sad records right now. So I'll go ahead and go to 30, because at 30 is the Arizona Coyotes. So I would understand if people said, well, I think Buffalo belongs ahead of Arizona, but again, their records are getting kind of close to one another. Arizona's racked up 7 wins now. Buffalo has 10. And keeping in mind, Buffalo won, their first 3 games of the year. They've won 7 since then. So, yeah, it's been a fall for Buffalo. It's one that we had kind of expected. And for Arizona, again, they get that win over Chicago. They've started scoring some goals. At the very least, it's entertaining. Clayton Keller with a good game tonight, too. So, yeah, I left them where they were. Number 29, staying in the same spot as last week, Seattle. Seattle affected by games being postponed, same as many of the other teams in the league. I don't think they played this week either. So, as I'm looking at my view counts this week, I'm thinking, well, yeah, they're down, but some teams haven't played at all. There's been no reason for certain fan bases to have even watched a hockey video this week because their team doesn't play and there's no moves being made. So I'll probably see them back when their teams start playing again. And for Seattle, not much changes when you're not playing games. Number 28, dropping one spot from last week because a team passed them, is Ottawa. Ottawa's been not playing either. They're supposed to play on Monday in Edmonton. Hopefully that game goes ahead. Being completely honest, in the provinces where they've got 50% attendance, I say let the teams play because we don't know when that's going to end. So delaying the games when you don't know when that's going to end, to me it seems kind of... I mean, I know it's odd to say that something in the NHL might be short-sighted, but that's how I feel it is. So yeah, Ottawa, they're number 28, and they just dropped because somebody passed them. Number 27, dropping 3 spots from last week. Rough week for Philadelphia. And for the Flyers, it's just, you get that bounce after you've changed coaches, and then reality will usually set in. So for Philly, it kind of feels like that's what's gone on there. And so a lot of the issues they were having under Vigneault, they're still having now. And yeah, so if you're a Flyers fan, I guess look forward to the draft lottery, right? If they picked up Shane Wright, that would fix a lot of their issues. Number 26, dropping 1 spot from last week. I agonized over this. I did. Because I watched Chicago beat Vegas tonight, and I thought, well, that's great. But they did lose against Arizona. They're still 6 games below the NHL 500 mark. And so, if anything, that prevented them from being below Philadelphia on tonight's list. So, Chicago drops 1 spot. They're 12, 18, and 5 now, something like that. So for Chicago, maybe the win over Vegas will spur them on. Maybe that loss to Arizona will click something in for them. But yeah, Chicago at 26. Rounding out this row, moving up 3 spots from where they were last week. They lost tonight, but I didn't move them down because for New Jersey, I think they're playing well enough to be at the front of this row. I don't know that they graduate above this row. I mean, they lost against Columbus tonight. They're still a few games below 500. And it's been a struggle for them. But again, we've got a lot of teams right now that look like could be sellers at the deadline. And I mentioned this in the review. I'm mentioning it here too because I'm kind of hoping for a really good trade deadline. We haven't had those recently. They've kind of been duds. So hopefully this year that's different. if we get that full schedule and there's that nice separation between teams in the playoffs and out. So the teams that are out can be full-on sellers. The teams that are in can be full-on buyers. We have bidding wars. We could have a lot of first-rounders getting potentially moved. They might be 2023 first-rounders if, certain GMs feel like this year's first round's really stacked. So we'll see what happens. Moving on to the next row. Number 24, moving up 2 spots from where they were last week, the New York Islanders. So I talked about the separation between teams that are in the playoffs and outside the playoffs in the East. I don't want to count the Islanders out. I still feel like there's time for the Islanders to maybe get this together, and it may just be that blind spot because Barry Trotz is the coach. We'll see whether or not it's a blind spot, or maybe they are going to be capable of that. So they're number 24 this week, and we'll see whether or not they move up next week. Number 23, same spot as last week, Columbus. There are some teams on the board that, when they win or they lose, I still feel like they're in the right spot. In Columbus's case, I feel like they're in the right spot at 23. Close to New Jersey. The two are close to one another. Columbus now 16-1. And again, they're not out of the playoff picture, but how long will they be in the playoff picture if Boston, maintains their solid record? They've got games in hand on most teams around them in that chase. Realistically, how long can Columbus stay in this? And will they end up selling at the deadline? And who might they sell, right? Number 22, same spot they were last week as well, Detroit. One thing with fewer games being played is that I understand when I do this at the end of the week that certain teams haven't moved. For Detroit, they're very good at home. They're very mediocre on the road. I've had them in about the same spot on the board for a long while now, and I don't see that necessarily changing. They now drop below the playoff line because Boston's been playing those games in hand, and Detroit's fallen back a bit. And the loss against LA tonight, that one kind of hurts. And I think what hurt in that one is, first off, their road record's terrible, but just that first period was alarming. Absolutely alarming. Number 21, the biggest drop of the week. It's tied with another team, but it's the first one I'll talk about. Dropping 6 spots from last week is the Oilers. It is a pretty miserable time for the Edmonton Oilers. They lost that 6 in a row, then they won a couple, but they've gone right back into, tank mode. And now they've got 2 teams sitting between them and a playoff spot. Both San Jose and LA have now passed the Oilers. The Oilers are below the playoff line. So games in hand being what they are and all that, Edmonton's not out of it by any means, and I don't think there's a reason to panic for Edmonton yet. I'll be doing a panic index this week, though. But you get the feeling with the interviews with Tippett right now, and I would say the fact that now they're below the playoff line, there's going to be some concerns now with Edmonton. Number 20, moving up 1 spot because Edmonton's fallen, and that's San Jose. San Jose right now occupies that final playoff spot in the West. And I don't know whether that's a sign that San Jose is playing really well. I think it's more of a damning indictment for the West right now, where, there's some teams that aren't necessarily playing all that well. We could end up with a kind of mediocre team ending up in that second wildcard spot, which might perk up the ears of Canuck fans everywhere going, hey, we can be mediocre. We can get there. But all kidding aside, San Jose's in that playoff spot. We'll see if they can, start stringing wins together. That's been the issue for San Jose this year, right? And that's how you end up 19-16-1. You're not quite getting those big winning streaks that you need if you're going to end up in a pretty solid, comfortable playoff spot. Number 19, also moving up 1 spot from last week. So because the Oilers drop, Winnipeg moves up 1 spot. Winnipeg, it's been a mixed bag with the Jets as well. It feels like they're on the verge of maybe going on a bit of a run, but you get that feeling, and then the game against Colorado takes place, and you go, there's a lot of work left to be done for Winnipeg, isn't there? So for the Jets, I do think they can end up getting that second wildcard spot. I could absolutely see them ending up being a wildcard team and being a real pain in the you-know-what to play against in the first round as an underdog. I think Winnipeg showed that last year, and I think they can show it again this year. But we'll find out, right? So they're number 19. Number 18 on the board. Also dropping. These guys dropped 1 spot from last week. They didn't play this week. Vancouver. I had mentioned last feels like last year, doesn't it? Last week's power rankings. I had mentioned how for the Vancouver Canucks, they could end up in the top 16. And at one point this week, they were actually in the top 16. Even though they didn't play, there was a team, Edmonton, who dropped and they passed them. And then they had two teams past them. So there's two teams that I moved up ahead of them. So they dropped one spot in the power rankings, even though they didn't play this week, because those two teams had a pretty good week. So for Vancouver, they dropped to 18th. And here's to hoping they have a good road trip. They're going through what is the new Valley of Death, which is the Florida, Carolina, and then they got Washington as well. That's a quite the roadie. And then I think they play St. Louis as well, right? It's going to be a rough month, or it's going to be a great month, right? Depends how you look at it. Number 17, dropping 4 spots from last week, is Calgary. So for the Flames, the results speak for themselves. They've been very good on the road. They go through that road trip through the two Florida teams in Carolina, and it just shows that those two Florida teams in Carolina, they are contending teams. They're playing the kind of hockey that I think will win in the playoffs. And so for Calgary, they were not able to get into that upper echelon of the league, and it showed that they are a step below. I think they're still a playoff team. I know I have them at 17th on the board, but I think they're still a playoff team. But I mean their home record isn't great, so if their road record starts to fall, if this road trip is a harbinger of something, it could get rougher for Calgary from here. Moving into the top 16, moving up 3 spots from last week. So they're back where they were 3 weeks ago, because they didn't do a power rankings 2 weeks ago. And that's Boston. So Boston with the win over Tampa. They had the loss against Minnesota, but they seem to be trending in the right direction. I think they've won 4 out of 5. So for Boston, it looks like they're trending in the right direction. They're above the playoff line. They should be able to hold off Detroit. I don't know if there's anybody below Detroit. Again, maybe the Islanders can be that team that suddenly goes on a 8-9 game heater, but we'll see. And so for Boston, they've bounced back from what was a rough 3-game losing streak for them, and they're on the good side of the board again. Number 15, also moving up 3 spots from where they were last week, and that's Dallas. For Dallas, it was disheartening how the Florida game needed a shootout. They get the win there, and again, with shootouts, I treat them like ties, right? I don't treat them like victories. So I didn't really bump Dallas up based on that. That win over Pittsburgh today, that was nice, and so they have 4 wins in a row right now. And for Dallas, it's been a nice little run for them, and we'll see whether or not this is sustainable, right? Is this the run now where Dallas, maybe they become that team to get that wild card spot? Maybe Dallas and Winnipeg are fighting it out. Maybe Vancouver gets into that when they start playing again, right? But for Dallas, playing against tough competition, getting themselves a couple victories, kind of nice to see. We'll see if they can keep it up. Number 14, in the same spot as last week, and there is the chance they're going to start dropping, and that's Anaheim. The Ducks game tonight against the Rangers, it was a tough game for Anaheim, and again, Zegras is back, but I didn't bust them down for it. So again, I update the board every day. Doesn't mean the teams move up or move down based on the results. I may look at the result and go, they're in the right spot on the board, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean if a team wins, they have to move up, or if a team loses, they have to move down. That's not how I work it. But for Anaheim, they're in some trouble here, because Dallas and Boston, another good week for them. And if Calgary bounces back, I could see Anaheim being as low as 18th next week. Because again, Vancouver's going to start playing. If Anaheim continues to give up points and continues to not have those convincing victories, they could find themselves in the lower half of the board. It's been remarkable how long they've been in the top half, though. Number 13, this has to be the highest they've been in a long time. They move up 3 spots from last week, and that's the LA Kings. I guarantee there's a Kings fan somewhere watching this that's like, okay, he's forgotten the puck for LA. He's going to have to start over. There's no way we're this high up. And there you are. For the Kings, the win over Detroit tonight was really authoritative. Yes, Detroit, they also didn't have a great game, but let's give credit to the Kings here. The Kings can be very good. They can also be tremendously mediocre at times, but currently, now they're ahead of the Oilers. They're playing, I think, pretty darn well. And if they can find that consistency in their game, they could be in that hunt for that wild card spot too. Again, the West is really wide open. Number 12, dropping one spot from last week. And I'm not, once we get into the top 12, I have really gone over these quite a bit, and I've really had to think some of these through. So number 12, dropping one spot from last week, Nashville. Nashville, good week for them. Yep, absolutely good week for them. I felt there was a team that's on quite the winning streak that passed them. That's Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh last week was number 12. So Nashville would have been number 11 if not for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the streak they're on. That's really it. It's not a matter of Nashville playing badly. It's not a matter of anything being wrong with their game. I mean, they played well tonight. Forsberg's in the protocol list now, right? So they did pretty well, considering Forsberg wasn't in the lineup. It was Arizona, yes, but they were up 3-0 after one. I thought they played a good game. And Tanner Jeannot continues to impress people. Number 11, dropping 3 spots from last week, Minnesota. Now, the Wild had a very impressive couple of victories this week. They did. But I still have some concern about Minnesota going forward. And, the win over Boston, great. The win over Washington, there's a little bit of luck in that. So I really wanted to kind of reward them for that, but I thought, wait a minute. That empty net goal that Washington scored on themselves is kind of what gets that game to overtime, right? So, Minnesota ends up staying at 11. Washington, though, they take a bit of a drop this week, just a bit. But yeah, Minnesota at number 11, I'm comfortable with them at 11 for right now. We'll see how long Kaprizov's out. We'll see how long everybody's out, right? Unlike other teams that are dealing with almost everybody on the COVID protocol list, for Minnesota, almost all of them are injuries. There's a lot of guys getting hurt for Minnesota right now. It's at like Colorado or St. Louis level right now. Number 10, same spot as last week, the New York Rangers. I'm happy with the Rangers at 10. They can look very good some nights. The game against Vegas was not their best. Then they bounced back. They had a good game against Anaheim where they only allowed 13 shots. So to me, I'm like, okay, Rangers stay in the same spot. That's fine. I don't see them as a top row team right now. Will they get back there? Probably, yeah. But for the Rangers, I have them at number 10 at this point. Number 9, dropping 6 spots from last week. So this is a team that drops out of the top row. 2 teams dropped out of the top row this week, and in this case, it's the Capitals. The Caps, and I know there's players on their missing list too that are key guys, but I have some concerns. The overtime and shootout losses are getting to be really high. It's weird because Ovechkin has 51 points, but it hasn't been. It feels like that power play is dragging him down a bit. It feels like they're just not sharp for a full 60 right now. And so when I was going over this today, looking at the results, looking at where teams are at and who's playing well, and I felt like, I can drop Washington out of that top row. And I think that really tightens up who's in the top 8. Now, can Washington get back? Absolutely. Backstrom being out hurts. Once Backstrom's back, that helps. Once Oshie's back, that helps. We know that other players are going to go onto the protocol list too. It's this mismatch, but we'll see with the Caps. But I have them at number 9. Moving into the top row. Number 8, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Florida. So for Florida, their road record now is 5-4-5. So it's not great. They're still allowing a lot of goals. There's still some concerns there when it comes to, and if you want to say it's their goaltending, okay. If you want to say it's the blue line, okay. I can understand either argument. Maybe it's the style of hockey they play. They're just going to have some goals go in against them, right? And so for Florida, we'll see if they're really and truly back on track. The win tonight in Carolina, great. That's fantastic. We'll see whether or not they keep that up. But I have them at number 8 on the board currently. So they're in the top row. Number 7, dropping 1 spot from last week. So still in the top row. But what bothers me with Vegas is that I know that when they pull the goaltender, they get these 6-on-5 goals. I know it's exciting. The fans go crazy. But it's not a sustainable model. As the season goes on, when you're down going to the third period, you're usually going to lose those games. When you're behind with 5 minutes left, you're usually going to lose those games. And it's a fact that as the season goes along, usually you'll see fewer and fewer of those comebacks. So for Vegas, I do have some concerns about them playing a full 60 minutes. But they've been good. They did handle the New York Rangers. They did lose tonight against the Chicago Blackhawks. Thus, the drop where they're, no longer number 6 to number 7. But to me, they're still a top row team, just not as much of a top row team as they were. We'll see whether or not maybe there ends up being a market correction with Vegas at some point where they end up dropping down to, say, 11th, 12th, that kind of thing. But at this point, we're not there. Number 6, dropping 2 spots from last week, is Tampa. Tampa is so unpredictable. So they go without Vasilevsky, and it's like, man, can't wait till they get Vasilevsky back. And then Vasilevsky had 2 not very Vasilevsky-like games this week. So for Tampa, yeah, they end up dropping to number 6. Do I want to meet them in the playoffs? Heck no. They just got Kucherov back. But again, and this is that thing where when you get those star players back, it doesn't always equal immediate success. Sometimes it equals an experience that's not all that fantastic, usually called a learning experience. So what also happened with Tampa this week was there were 2 teams that I felt were playing better than Tampa this week. And so both of them passed the Tampa Bay Lightning. At number 5, moving up 2 spots from last week, is St. Louis. It has been a very gradual climb for the St. Louis Blues. But the climb is still happening. They're still playing well. And that's how the board should work. It should be a gradual climb. And so if you're watching and you're like, my team's too low, if they have the results, they will start moving up. Early on in the season, Nashville was down in the 20, 30, 22 region. Now they're up at 12, and they're going to start pegging their way up if they keep getting those wins. And for St. Louis, it's been a great run. So I did not penalize them for that loss against Pittsburgh at all. I did not bust them down for that loss to Pittsburgh. That was simply a case, in my eyes, it was they poked the bear with Crosby. You don't get Crosby. If Crosby's coasting along in a game, you just leave him. Dallas kind of did that a little bit today, where you just kind of leave him and just, and then you got a better chance, I think, at victory. And Dallas got that. That being said, moving up 8 spots from where they were last week is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has only played 3 teams above the playoff line in their last 11, but they've won 10 of their last 11. They had a 2-0 lead against Dallas. Dallas fought their way back. I thought Dallas had a really good game, and I thought it was more Dallas having a good game than Pittsburgh having a bad one. So, and then there's the fact, too, that Rust's out of the lineup for them, and that definitely throws off their first line. But, again, I wasn't busting them down today for that one result. When you look at that 10-game winning streak and what that's done for them, for me, I have Pittsburgh at number 4. I would imagine they'll bounce back the next game. Honestly, blowing a 2-goal lead is not very Pittsburgh-like. It really isn't. Their first periods have been fantastic throughout the winning streak. I think tonight's going to be an exception, not the rule. Number 3 on the board. They were number 1 last week, so they dropped. And that's Toronto. Now, Toronto only lost 1 game this week. But, that loss made me kind of nervous. And not only that, but there's 2 teams that I feel right now are playing fantastic hockey. And so more than Toronto playing badly, I feel these 2 teams are playing really, really well. And tonight's game kind of made me decide who was going to be at number 2 and who was going to be at number 3. So the Toronto Maple Leafs end up at number 3. Still having a very good season. They get a point in Denver, but they probably should have had 2. And they allowed way too many goals. But that being said, everybody allows way too many goals against Colorado. Colorado moves up 3 spots from where they were last week. So there's always that discussion of whether or not I favor Colorado over others. The reality is Colorado's playing really, really well. Colorado has just, and I know that tonight wasn't a great night for Kemper. Kemper's been really good for the last couple of weeks as well. And so tonight was the exception, but then Francouz goes in and plays really well in relief. So we'll see whether or not the Colorado Avalanche are able to get themselves going for the rest of the season based on, what's going on now. Like 82 games is tough. And can they maintain this? We'll see. But considering, I think they had, the 4-5-1 start to the season, their record now is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And at number 1, moving up one spot from where they were last week, is Carolina. So Carolina takes the loss in overtime tonight. They had a fantastic week. So they still get the point in that game. They're 24-7-2 now? Yeah, Carolina's fine. And that's the thing. Wins and losses don't always cause that movement on the board. It used to. When I did the power rankings 4 years ago when I started out, if a team loses, they drop. If a team wins, they move up. Guaranteed. They have to. And it led to some teams being ranked too high and some teams being ranked too low. So for me, Carolina's loss tonight, it's a loss, but it doesn't mean they lose first place. They got first place a couple of days after the last power rankings. I think it was Monday that I moved them up to first, and they haven't moved out of first since then. It's been, because again, and this is while Toronto was still winning, and I was like, okay, Toronto's winning, but Carolina's looking so good. Carolina does at least belong in first place right now. And so there you go. There was a lot of discussion about me bumping Carolina down to 9th a month and a half ago, but they have pegged their way back up to number 1 on the board. I think this is the 4th week they've been number 1, and I'm pretty sure that's the highest number out of any team this year. So it's a pretty good year for Carolina. Does that mean a Stanley Cup? No. This is regular season power rankings. When you get to the Stanley Cup playoffs, all of this becomes great and fine, but it becomes kind of background noise. And then in the playoffs, you just never know, because you don't know who Carolina's going to get in the first round. Let's say they get Boston in the first round. Boston's had a good record against them in the playoffs in recent years. So we'll see what happens. But there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always, as people always do. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happen upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.